Okay, slay. I'm playing a little bit of the. Okay, it will work. Okay. Oh yeah.
Is it raining? लाइट ऑफ करनी पड़ेगी मैं पीछे वाली एक ऑफ कर दो थोड़ी डिम कर देते हैं वाली yeah do you think the lights dim will make a better
Yeah, let's do the lights. Yeah. Ah, yeah. No, it's fine. I'm just panicking in my head. Don't you worry about me. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Keep the Fire Burning. Thank you, Dean Montez. Wake these people up. Come on. This chapel is based on the Samuel Dewitt Proctor Conference that takes place every February. The theme this year was Sacred Fire, Igniting Resilience, Resistance, and Response. One of the people who led the conference said that this theme was picked not to be silent, not to be polite, but to show up and show out. For those who do not know what Proctor is, it brings together black religious leaders to engage global human rights issues. While there, people can connect, share laughs, scholarship, and honestly, black joy. I will talk about this a little later, but to me, Proctor felt like a family reunion. Even if I were meeting someone for the first time or had walked these very halls with them, our conversation felt natural, like talking to an old friend. Now, today we have a full schedule for you, but we will be starting off with music. Music was a big part of Proctor to many of us, so it felt only right to begin that way. I am going to be playing a song by Zacardi Cortez, who we got to see perform live. His energy is the perfect way to represent Proctor.
Do it for me, oh Lord, do it for me, oh Lord, if you don't do it, it just won't be done. So Lord, do it for me. Sometimes I get desperate and I say it like this. I say, Lord, fix it for me. Anybody know that only God can do it? Oh, fix it for me. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Because, Lord, I have a problem that only you can solve. So, Lord, play that for me? Lord, do it for me. Lord, I need you to do it right now. I can't wait till tomorrow. Do it for me. Lord, if you don't do it, it just won't be done. So Lord, do it for me. Listen, Lord, fix it for me. Anybody know God can do it? Oh, Jesus, fix it for me. Lord, I have a problem that only you can solve. Lord, I need you to do it for me. Everybody say it right now. Say, Lord, do it for me. If you need God to do something, say, Lord, do it for me. Do it. Yeah. Lord, if you don't do it, it just won't be done. Somebody say, Lord, do it for me. One more time and I'm leaving it alone. Somebody say, Lord, before I get home, do it for me. Come on, just wave your hands. If you need God to do something, say, do it for me. I'll do it. Lord, if you somebody needs you, it just won't be. Somebody needs you to do it. Now I just need everybody in here tonight to lift your hands. If you need God to do something,
Lift your hands up. He said lift your hands. Yeah.
if you need God to do something right now, lift your hands. Lord, I need you. I don't want to wait till tomorrow. Yeah. If you don't do it, it just won't be good. Y'all say, Lord, please, Jesus, do it. I can't count on nobody else. I need you to do it. Yeah, Lord. I tried everybody else. I tried everybody else. Can you do it for my mama? Come on, somebody say, Lord. Can't nobody do me like this. Lord, if you please, Jesus, please, Jesus, do it for me. Come on, clap your hands if you need God to do something right now.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're gonna have Art come up and read, and then follow the other things, you know.
This one? Ah, okay. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So Luke 10. All right. All right. So the first reading will be coming from Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Once, while Jesus was standing beside the lake of Gennesaret, and the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he saw two boats there at the shore of the lake. The fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little way from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the crowds from the boat. And I'm like, I so relate to that. Like, take me out to the water, and then I'll talk to these people. Like, yeah. That's my guy. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing." That is to say, we ain't found. So, Spaceballs, if you know the reference, Yep. I'm dating myself, that's all right. When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to burst. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were astounded at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him. The second reading comes from John chapter 21. And it goes, "When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' And he said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' Jesus said to him, 'Feed my lambs.' A second time he said to him, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' He said to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' Jesus said to him, 'Tend my sheep.' He said to him a third time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' Now Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, 'Do you love me?' And he said to him, 'Lord, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you.' Jesus said to him, 'Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go.' He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. And after this he said to him, 'Follow me.'"
So, one element of the Black church tradition that we experience very prominently at Proctor is the tradition of preaching. There were a lot of great preachers at Proctor, and so in honor of some of those that we heard, I am going to do a little preaching. On the readings we just had, as well as some other materials they gave us at Proctor. And, this semester, Cornell West, in my class, which Joe is in, has been discussing this notion of vocation. It stayed on my mind, and it was on my heart as I went to Proctor. And it was through the lens of vocation, discerning my own vocation, that I experienced Proctor. And it left a deep impression on me. Cornell West speaks very passionately about vocation. What is a vocation? It is not merely a job. And Brother West is quick to explain to us that if our only roots in this life are in that of our occupation, we will be quick to sell our souls to advance in our careers, which is so often the case in our society. Our vocation can never be professional. And we must resist this tendency, which is so common today, to define our entire life's work in the bounds of a profession. None of us are called to be an accountant or a lawyer or any other profession by which we make a living. Vocation is a matter of how we direct our love. We may be called to protect the environment out of a love for creation, and this could manifest in a career in environmental law. But the vocation is our love of creation, not the lawyership. We may be called to fight for the dignity of our brothers and sisters out of a deep and abiding love of neighbor, and this may manifest in working as potentially a community organizer. But organizing is not the vocation, it is the primacy of the love for our community. Vocation is a matter of soulcraft, directing our love, not merely making a living. And often, most often, our vocation manifests outside of the bounds of a professional title. For this world rarely makes it financially rewarding to do that which is moral. If our roots ought to be planted outside of the bounds of a profession, then where are we to plant our roots? Well, Cornel West uses the concept of invocation, right? Same root as vocation. But this was also a prominent theme at Proctor. The opening worship on the first day of the conference began with a ceremony that is often called the pouring of libation. And this is a ritual pouring out, which we had planned to do here, but we didn't end up happening. But it is an invocation ceremony where we call our ancestors in veneration. We invoke them to join us spiritually in the space that we inhabit. Our roots, then, ought to be in a tradition, and it is the role of our ancestors, or, if you prefer, saints, right, to be models of a vocation discovered and lived out. We need the examples of those who have gone before us, not only as spiritual invigoration, but also to help us discover our own vocation in this world. They are testaments to the possibilities of how our love can be directed. Now, in the many conversations I had with people at the conference, in the worship, in the witnesses of the fellow activists I met, I saw a beautiful testimony to vocation. Fellow people who knew their calling and were trying to make a difference in the world by living out the message of love. And this, anytime someone finds their vocation and lives it out in the world, it's bound to cause a stirring. And this is what Cornel West refers to as provocation, a provocation, right? So we have invocation to find our vocation, to make a provocation. And I'd like to share a piece of this shared tradition that the people at Proctor were pulling from in reading a section of this creed to the Black church tradition. It says, "We believe that the gospel records how Jesus embodied the incarnate seeds of Christianity as a protest movement that still calls us to stand against imperial and hegemonic powers. The Spirit of the Lord birthed two significant manifestations, namely the Black social gospel movement, which became a kind of transmutation into the Black church tradition. And together they shape the Black socio-religious and socio-political consciousness and our collective cultural worldview. The Black social gospel movement and the Black church tradition then continue to light a flamed torch for justice that illumes the indefatigable path toward a divinely ordained liberation. Now, what strikes me in the wording of this creed is how the invocation of Jesus Christ and the Black church tradition creates this shared socio-religious and socio-political consciousness. And this is one of the most important roles of tradition, to offer a unifying worldview. In other words, to bring a diverse group of people into communion. Tradition is a striking rebellion against the individualism that so alienates us in a post-Enlightenment world. For even as the liberalism that was promised as freedom in the Enlightenment, it was a freedom in a double sense, a freedom perhaps from coercion in the guise of individual liberty, but also a damning freedom, a freedom to sell our labor, to become wage slaves, to be separated from each other, from the earth, and ultimately even separated from ourselves. And the fact that so many of us today struggle with viewing a vocation, our calling, as distinct from our occupation, what we do to make a living, is a striking testament to how influenced we all are by this Enlightenment view, which has proved to be ultimately alienating and hyper-individualistic. Now, turning to the scripture readings, the Gospel of Luke shows Peter in the sea fishing, and he receives a call from Christ to join him in his ministry. Jesus approaches Peter and tells him to cast his net. Peter has been fishing all night, and from his point of view, perhaps by any rational estimation, there was no reason for Peter to believe that he would make a catch, right? And here, I think we find one of the core principles of vocational discernment. And that it's not necessarily something that is entirely rational or something we can empirically measure. Now, the Enlightenment asserted the primacy of reason and rationality over all other forms of being in the world. It pursued an unfettered knowledge for the sole purpose of control. It seeks understanding in order to dominate. It disenchants nature so that it might be controlled, ultimately subjugated. But vocation is often more of an intuitive matter. It's something you feel in your heart, a discernment of spirit. It is a call from beyond, and like in the case of Peter, it requires a certain surrender to something greater than yourself. It requires a loosening of control, which is one of the hardest things for most of us who cling so tightly to the control we have over our lives. Yet it does us well to remember the African church father, Augustine, taught that pride destroys love, and it is ultimately humility that allows any form of love to exist. When we allow ourselves to have a degree of faith, to surrender to something greater than ourselves, we may just be amazed, as Peter is when he catches a full load of fish. So amazed is he that he leaves everything, including his family, to fully devote himself to a life of love lived out in the world. Then we have the excerpt from the Gospel of John, which shows Peter, after his 3 betrayals of Christ during the Passion, meeting with the resurrected Jesus. And Jesus asked Peter if he loves him 3 times. And Peter responds, increasingly desperate, "You know I love you, Lord." And each time, Jesus' response to Peter is a vocational calling, a way in which Christ would like Peter to direct his love. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. This is a remarkable redirection. It gets at a core question for many of us. How ought our love of Christ be directed? The answer? To one another. Our love ought to be directed communally. If we love Christ, he calls us to show that love by caring for each other. And it is exactly this collective spirit that was so alive and well at the Proctor conference. It also tells us another thing about vocational discernment, and that is this. Our vocation is always outwardly focused. The love is always for something greater than ourselves, ultimately directed at each other or the world. The love, never let anyone tell you, in this case, that God does not take sides, because Jesus, throughout the gospel and in the reading today, takes sides with the poor and the oppressed. And as a final note, I just want to connect this message with an experience, a brief experience I had at Proctor, and that was at the final dinner. I stood next to Reverend Myrick, and speaking to a man, he mentioned a term that I had not heard before. It was ma'afa. And I was a little embarrassed not to know this term, but I asked anyway. As I found out, it was a term from Swahili, and it literally translates to great disaster. But it refers to the mass forced enslavement and shipment of Africans to the New World by European powers, and the subsequent and continued years of slavery. It is the term essentially for the Black Holocaust, and that is how it's sometimes translated. And it begins in the transatlantic slave trade, where the same Enlightenment thinking that we take for granted today, used to conquer nature, was applied to Africans. I was a bit embarrassed not to know this term, thinking I ought to know the word, but I asked shyly, and this man corrected me. He said, "You don't need to be embarrassed here," he told me. At Proctor, we embody the principle that we celebrate in Kwanzaa each year, the principle of ujamaa. We truly believe that we are all present in each other, and in order to build anyone up, we need to build everyone up. And this was very similar to something that I heard at the New York Black Catholic Congress earlier last year. And that was the definition of ujamaa, collective work and responsibility, to build and maintain our community together, to make our sisters and brothers' problems our problems, and to solve them together. And it is exactly this principle that we see in the Black Church Creed and in the Scriptures. For indeed, if we want to love Christ, we have to answer his call to feed my sheep. And that is the call to build each other up and treat each other as brother and sister.
We are over time, almost. So, since I'm the only person taking this class for credit, I will be sharing my reflection so that I can pass the class. Thank you. Attending the Samuel Dewitt Proctor conference was an amazing experience. Originally, I had my worries about attending, but this year I wanted to make an effort to attend before I leave the halls of union. I only regret not attending the conference sooner. Upon arrival, I felt like I was home. Even though I did not share the same theology or thoughts as many of those attending, it felt like a reunion. While attending the conference, the one significant part that made me know I would love to attend each year was the leadership transition ceremony. It began with asking the elders permission to begin, then featured drumming, similar to Union's graduation ceremony, please come to it, and included an ancestral veneration portion that Chris talked about. These intentional moments of inviting our roots into the space meant a lot to me. When talking to alums, I learned that the Pan-Africanist elements had not been this prevalent in past years. However, it seems the conference is willing to grow and listen to its youth's feedback. That, to me, shows care and understanding for all attending, which I truly appreciated. Jonathan Jackson, the son of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson, was also present, and his words were electrifying. A direct quote that stood out to me was, "Stay on the battlefield." This call to keep going, as he calls us inheritors of rich Black prophetic religion, was so necessary in these trying times. It is clear that this theme was born out of a need to keep the fire burning, a wink wink. The battle may be tough, but we should only keep fighting, not give up. The breakout sessions acted as a time for us to learn just how to keep our sacred fire. Each breakout session I attended was incredible, regardless of whether it challenged my views or simply educated me. I was excited to learn. I vividly remember a woman saying she identified as pro-life, a phrase that would typically turn many ears off. However, we kept listening to what she had to say, and her definition of pro-life is essentially how we define pro-choice. She believed that pro-life is doing what is necessary to keep one's life comfortable and in the long run, happy. Whatever you choose to do, she supports you. Many of us were shocked by this, but she said that reclaiming terms were important, which led her to the decision of claiming pro-life. Ideas like these just happen naturally at Proctor, and I was incredibly happy to see them. If I could change one thing about the conference, I would love to make it more inviting to other ways of belonging. It was kind of Christian-y, coming from a Christian. But that's what Samuel Dewitt Proctor was, so. But we could change it up. What would the conference look like if the workshops were based on Santeria or other diasporic religions? How could we discuss other theological, and I put it that way because that's a very Christian term itself, ideas at the conference? These two questions only came to me after the conference was over, and I did wonder if there were ways we could make it even better. But again, it was a lit time for sure. My favorite part of the conference would have to be the music. As someone who has attended many gospel concerts over the years, I love gospel music. Zacardi Cortez's performance at the gala was absolutely amazing, and had it not been basically the last day of conference, I'm sure I would have had more energy to enjoy his singing. Music equals healing to me. So having his performance mark the end of the conference for many who attended just made sense. The high energy, the audience participation, the pure Black joy is what this conference is made of. And this healing embodied experience would not have been possible at all without Janie and Art, shout out to Fierce. Their hard work in raising funds for many of us is what got us to Proctor, to a new home where we can grow and flourish. Now, some of our classmates couldn't join us, so if you're willing to bear with us some more time, I'm gonna read their reflections, but if you need to leave, I know it's over time, so feel free to, and thank you for joining. This one is from Amanda. Attending the Samuel Dewitt Proctor Conference for the second time was once again a deeply enriching and affirming experience. The conference creates a powerful space to learn and challenge yourself and others, especially within a community rooted in Black faith, scholarship, and shared purpose. One of the most meaningful aspects is the opportunity to grow closer with my peers at Union. As a commuter student that isn't on campus often, it provided the chance for me to spend more time with classmates. I formed some of my closest relationships through this conference. One workshop in particular this year that focused on self-care and rest for pastors and church leaders stood out as especially impactful. It created space to reflect on the demands of ministry and emphasized the necessity of rest as a spiritual discipline. It's not a luxury. In a vocation that often prioritizes pouring into others, the reminder to care for ourselves was much needed. One of my favorite parts this year was a speech from Jonathan Jackson, son of the late Rev. Jesse Jackson. Given that the conference took place shortly after his passing, hearing his son speak carried a deep emotional weight and made the moment feel especially powerful and memorable. Oopsie. Attending the Proctor conference is an experience I believe any Black student at Union who wants to go should be given the resources needed to attend. Now I'm reading Azarias. I am very grateful for the opportunity to attend the Proctor conference. I was truly blown away by the sense of community, the depth of connection, and the spirit of shared purpose present through the gathering. One of my biggest takeaways was the emphasis on Pan-African thought and identity, how it invites us to see ourselves as deeply interconnected across cultures, histories, and geographies. It reminded me of the power of collective resilience, shared heritage, and the importance of honoring the richness of the African diaspora in both personal and communal ways. This last piece was written by Janie, who went to the Jesse Jackson, bless you, the Jesse Jackson Memorial. It's about Black grief. And I felt it important in this space because grief is different for the Black community in many ways, and she highlights that. So, grief found me in line before it found me inside the church. I am not the biggest fan of Jesse Jackson, but there's no denying his impact on the Black church, on the Black political landscape, and on organizing traditions that shaped even my own entry into this work. As someone who first learned to name my organizing through a faith-based lens, I carried complicated feelings about showing up. Still, I was clear. I needed to be there for the public viewing. I had a flight to catch that afternoon, so I arrived early with cold hands and steady resolve, determined to be among the first inside. We grieve differently. We have to. There's so much Black grief and so little space to hold it. Even before entering, there were layers to move through, lines, checkpoints, a slow procession shaped by surveillance as much as sorrow. By the time I made it inside, the air felt stale, thick, policed. Officers and federal agents were everywhere, an environment deeply familiar yet profoundly inhospitable to Black grief, despite being a direct contributor to it. I watched Black women do what we have always done, hold everything. Many moved seamlessly between mourning and composure, between private ache and public presentation, cameras nearby, grief present, faces intact, and the epitome of and. We have never been binary, no matter how often we are forced into it. When I reached the family at the front of the sanctuary, I went to shake his eldest daughter's hands. She thanked me for waiting in the cold. I apologized for my hands being frozen, and she responded by holding them for a moment, offering warmth and comfort as I were the one in need. How are you comforting me right now? It felt absurd. It felt familiar. All around me were Black women elders, absorbing the sorrow of others while making little room for their own, a practice I know too well. I felt a quiet relief when one of the grandchildren broke. Their grief was uncontained, unapologetic. It was their grandfather lying there, and they refused to perform restraint. It felt like permission for all of us. Almost immediately, the eldest granddaughter stepped in, as eldest daughters are conditioned to do, gently urging composure. Don't cry, pull it together. At first, the younger ones resisted, a small and sacred defiance, before settling into something quieter. Though never fully releasing their whimper, even in containment, there was resistance. I expected that deeply. And then, unexpectedly, I felt myself tearing up. Not for the man exactly, but for the weight, the accumulation, the unprocessed grief pressing against the walls of the sanctuary. And for a moment, I had a clarifying question. This is what I have been calling church? A place that holds all the characteristics of somewhere grief could live, could move, could be witnessed, and yet so often does not. A place where grief is performed more than practiced, where the language of release exists but the conditions for it do not. It was heavy. Later, watching the first day of stream services unfold into a political spectacle over a cold body, it all clicked into place. When politics masquerades as a site of grief, when performance replaces practice, something sacred is lost. And maybe this is what I was feeling all along. Not just grief, but the absence of a place to put it. Thank you guys for coming. That's the end of our chapel.